Everybody's here, so thank you for getting here. I'm going to go through, I'm going to start the meeting off with the roll call. I'm just going to go down the list. Commissioner Szymanski,
Here.
Commissioner Schlosser,
Here.
Commissioner Taluzzi,
Here.
Commissioner Burns,
Here.
Commissioner Sheffer,
Here.
and Commissioner Gay.
Here.
And we have a number of people here with us at City Hall. Thank you all for being here. As you'll notice on your agenda, there's a number of different correspondence, probably 30 or so, and we'll go over those obviously during our discussion. What I'd like to do is open this up with some comments about the governor just got off a conference call and press conference, and he had a call with the mayors earlier this morning, just to give you a few details of what he's looking at. And then I've got some observations of what's been done so far, and I want to go over some of the numbers of what the city staff has done, and then go into the actual discussion. First off, as far as the governor is concerned, things are still working in a positive fashion. The hospitalizations are down to about 108, and about 10 days ago they were around 250. So that's a big positive decline, and I think he's seen a positive decline in hospitalizations about 14 to 20 days. The big fear that he has is the possible surge that we may see over the next couple of weeks because of the demonstrations that were in Wilmington, Dover, Middletown, Rehoboth, and across the country. But as far as the state's concerned, that's where his concerns are. We are now over 10,000 positive cases as of yesterday. And that's, but again, the numbers, he's testing many, many more than he was before. And so therefore the numbers continue to go up from a positive perspective because of a lot of testing. As he has said, the intensive testing that was taking place at the chicken plants is just about finished. And if you look at the numbers on his schedule or on his website, the numbers of positive cases in Sussex County versus Newcastle County is back down to around 250. And it was up over 1,000 about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So Sussex County is getting less and less of the positive cases overall. As everybody knows, as of 6/1, the governor's phase 1 took place, went into place. 30% capacity in restaurants, 30% capacity in retail shops. Hotels were available to open their rooms, all of their rooms, with limitations on public gathering spaces within the hotel. The rentals were opened up at that point in time. Obviously, as everyone knows, we had a pretty crowded weekend. Social distancing was pretty positive. Mask wearing was pretty positive given the circumstances. And we probably had the most crowded weekend this summer so far. Speaking with a number of different businesses, some of them surprisingly had some very positive numbers relative to a year before, which kind of surprised me. And Carol Everhart is on the call. She has mentioned that the hotels had done okay, not spectacular, but pretty well okay. And I'm sure she'll have something to say later on when she comments. As far as moving forward with the governor, he is going to 6/15, which is Monday, a week from now, for phase 2. His phase 2 numbers, he's already put out that it's going to 60% capacity on restaurants, 60% capacity on retail. Bars are open with limitations on social distancing. The commercial lodging will go to 60% of open spaces that are shared in hotels. Convention centers, meetings can take place up to 50 people with social distancing. And I mentioned food and drink. And that's pretty much so it from what his phase two is. On the press conference, actually, someone asked how quickly he's going to be able to get to phase three. His big concerns about getting to phase three is pushing it too quickly, especially with the most recent demonstrations. He's just going to watch and see about phase three. I think the phase three, his date-wise, is still looking and focusing on July 1st, but the specific numbers, he did not have anything to talk about it at that point in time. But I think he'll, as he sees things happen over this week, moving into phase two next week, I'm sure he'll give some thought to future numbers. As far as, some observations I'd like to point out that I've seen over the last week or so, I think it's been very positive. Obviously, as we look at the list of correspondence that we have on the agenda today, as well as the agenda last week a bit, we had a variety of different comments from a variety of different people, visitors, businesses, as well as residents. And I think, the overwhelming statements that I saw was people were very happy that the city was working with the businesses to allow them use of the sidewalks, the streets if necessary, whether for retail businesses or the restaurants. To date, we have had 30 applications for restaurants to work with our enforcement officers about placing items on the sidewalk. 26 of those with liquor licenses. And as I can see across the board on the chart that Dennis Jenny has provided, all of those have been approved. He's also worked with a number of the retail businesses where they had asked for more than the 3 feet on the sidewalk, and he has worked with them as well. So from my perspective, I see it as a pretty positive on what's happened so far. Looking around over the last 4 or 5 days being in downtown, I was downtown, for example, Saturday night around 6 o'clock, and there was a lot of crowd. They were social distancing, they were spreading out. The restaurants that had space on the sidewalk had customers on their tables, which I think looked very good. One thing that wasn't that great in my mind was, we put in the walkway with the barriers for social distancing. And unfortunately, what I saw on Saturday, they weren't social distancing by using that area. They were social distancing whether on the boardwalk or whether on the avenue or even on the side streets as much as possible. But many of the people that I saw were actually walking in very narrow spaces around the restaurants. Speaking with last Thursday and Friday, I was downtown with the communications director and the city manager, speaking to a number of the retail businesses, and they thought, they were very happy with the space on the sidewalk and the fact that the city was working with the businesses, both the restaurants and the retail business, to allow space. However, their thoughts, and many of the thoughts that we have received since that point in time, were, this is great for the restaurants. We want the restaurants to have the opportunity, but we'd also like to have the opportunity to take advantage of people walking up and down the sidewalks. As far as, I went around, I think on Saturday morning, and looked at the first 2 blocks on Rehoboth Avenue where we do have the barriers. And I noticed that, and I think it's still the case, on those 4 blocks, really, the 2 blocks north and south, we have over 100 businesses. And those businesses are food service, ice cream, French fries, restaurants, as well as retail shops, sweaters, jewelry, whatever. And only 4 of the 30 restaurants that have been approved are within the barrier area. There are a couple restaurants right in the barrier area, but they're not using as much space on the sidewalk. But there are 4 versus approximately 100 that aren't using the space. And surprisingly enough, around Wilmington, Baltimore, the third, fourth block of Rehoboth Avenue, of the 30 restaurants, there's 25, probably 23 that are in those spaces that, again, the city manager and the staff has worked with bump outs on the barriers, or just some of these restaurants just want to put 2 or 3 tables for 2 out front. So with that in mind, you know, everybody I've heard from, whether it's in these emails, phone calls, or actually speaking to people, I think the city did the right thing by opening up space for social distancing. Everybody was very happy that we were focused on the health and safety of the community. But with what has occurred over that time, people are thinking, well, you guys have said that you are going to, you know, monitor the situation, take a look at the situation. And many of these people have said, we would like you to take a look at the situation. And many people have said, look, we love that the restaurants are open here, but we, the retail shop side, would like more space to move around on the sidewalk so that our customers can walk on the sidewalk. And many of them have said they'd prefer to see the barriers removed, except for the restaurants, and parking resumed at that point in time. So those are pretty much my observations over the last week since we put the barriers in. Again, I think it's very successful. The restaurants that have the opportunity to be outside are very happy. I think a lot of the retail shops that see that the restaurants are improving and doing better business because they have more than the 30% inside, I think is very positive. But I would say the majority of the people on the avenue have stated that they would like to see, if we can, and they're not pushing us, they're basically seeing if we can, to make it work for everybody. And, you know, their whole point of view is we, the commissioners, represent the whole community. And so if we can work certain things out that can benefit all the businesses, all the better. So with that, I will open it up, and I believe the first hand that went up was Edward.
Thank you, Mayor. I would certainly agree with your observations. And given the correspondence, which is on both sides, in favor and not in favor of having the barriers up, even those that are in favor are being pretty clear that they like the outdoor dining aspect of it, but not necessarily the public or more space for social distancing. And I think your observations are right on. Not many people are using it. Part of that could be because, you know, proper signage isn't there, and it's, you know, hasn't been. Some people are confused. They don't know why it's there. So I think you're right. I think, you know, when we started this process, we agreed that we would continuously monitor and adjust as needed. And I think listening to the folks in our community, we need to make some adjustments. We just need to decide how best to do that. I certainly don't want to take anything away from the businesses that are depending on what we've allowed them to do. So, you know, I think we just need to look at it some more creative ways to allow what we instituted while taking away some of the wasted space that people are not using for social distancing, which surprises me, but I mean, that's just the reality. People don't seem to care that much about it. So I would, Mayor, one question I have for you while we begin this discussion is a lot of the restaurant businesses are already at capacity at that 30%, given the spacing requirement for the tables. So I think it would be helpful to hear that with the conversations from the governor's office, if that is being addressed at all, because essentially going from 30% to 60%, if the tables need to remain the same distance apart, they're not getting anything more from 30 to 60%. Do you have any update on that?
No real update on that, but that's obviously something, I can give, the governor's aide a call tomorrow or tonight, to imply what the situation is here, that many of these places from 30% to 60%, well, that's great, but if the tables are still 8 feet apart, it's a lot harder. So I think they're gonna push back a bit on that, but I'm sure that's something that he's speaking with the Restaurant Association about, because it's not just Rehoboth, but it's around the state that the restaurants have that. Many areas around the state have taken advantage of working with municipalities, much like Rehoboth, to put tables outside. Most of the places around the state, with the exception of Rehoboth and maybe 1 or 2 of the other communities down here, most of them are doing it on private property. And when they don't have the outside, when they don't have the private property, they put a couple tables out front. But I will discuss that with him to get maybe some kind of an indication if it's a different structure inside.
Thank you. My last comment would be, and I think it's for Dennis to provide some guidance on if we put the barriers back. There's some restaurants that are roped off, and some that just have signs where people can still walk through, but it says no alcohol behind this point or something like that. I think we need to have more consistent guidelines on whether, sidewalk tables people can walk around or through without having ropes up or something else that would block pedestrian walking.
Yeah, Dennis is coming over, but from an alcohol beverage control perspective, they do need some kind of a barrier, whether it's a rope or stanchions, because you can't walk through the middle of that. But Dennis is here to comment.
Right, that is true. That's part of the requirement when they fill out their application, to show that barrier around the seating area. No one should be walking through the sidewalk between tables. Everybody should be using that walkway that we provided with the barriers. I paid a visit to several restaurants last week, Thursday, Friday night, to explain this to them. I told them they need to be in compliance with those barriers that they submitted with their plans. Because, you went down to Purple Parrot, people were just walking right through it. And same thing down the other end here, a couple of restaurants. And anybody could just walk up and sit down at one of the tables. So I've made it clear to them. However, enforcement-wise, that comes into play with the alcohol board. I've let them know also, if the alcohol board just decide to do a spot check down here, that can jeopardize the license. So I catch one, I'll give them a reminder, but my hands are a little tied as far as going any further with enforcement.
Is that it, Edward?
Yeah, I thank you.
Commissioner Gay.
Yes, thanks, Mayor, first of all, for your observations and for some of that data on the applications and the numbers that have been approved and where they're located. I've got several things. But first, I wanted to give some feedback and sort of the optics, both from what I observed personally over the last week, as well as, feedback from others. And I will say, I'll start off by saying that my husband and I ate out 2 nights outdoor dining last week, and it was wonderful both times. It was the first time we've been out to eat since March, and it was extremely festive, and we had a great time. Attached to the agenda today, in addition to all the letters, are 2 photographs, and those are for me, that are sort of representative of some of the challenges and issues that I saw. And, we've alluded to some of this, but one of them is the walkway with no one in it. And that was taken at noon on Saturday. And actually, I only submitted 1 picture, but we have 4 in a row for the entire stretch, and they were all empty at that time. And then the other picture is of people walking among the tables. And at the one restaurant that I took the picture at, and that was Saturday at about 6:30. Even though that particular restaurant I don't believe has an alcohol license, I did notice it and also heard about it from others at restaurants that do. I mean, one friend of mine commented that people walking by, he was afraid they were going to pick up his wine glass and have a sip. So, so it's just, and I don't know that anybody minded, but clearly, there could be some problems with that. So, I mean, some of this is just human behavior. And I think we have to recognize that human behavior dictates what people are going to do unless there are, specific, and enforced barriers. And, signage I know has been talked about. I'm not sure if we're getting any depending on what we do there, but the signage is probably not going to do anything, because all you have to do is go down to Turtle Bridge and see the signs about not feeding the wildlife, and then turn your head and look at all the people feeding the wildlife. So human behavior is what it is, and I think that's definitely the case here. The confusion I heard about the barriers was that people thought they might be there to demarcate areas for protests, so they didn't necessarily see them as social distancing as much as they did having to do with our preparation for having people there for protesting. So that was an issue that came up. And, we want, obviously, to encourage, and the restaurants want to encourage people to eat out. But, several people said they weren't really comfortable eating with people walking all around them. And again, maybe that answer is once everyone has the appropriate barrier, that'll go away. But even on just right outside the sidewalk on the walkway, there were still people pretty close. And that gets to a lot of the inconsistency, and some of it's standards on our part, because in some areas you have the barriers, and in many areas you don't. And there's only, I think last week when we brought this up, it was 3 feet for ADA, but yet I thought the goal for social distancing was 6 feet. So in some areas you have it, some areas you don't. And that there's a lot of inconsistency there. And just a matter of how we'll determine the results. I mean, the feedback, I think, from certainly from the restaurants, has been that they couldn't do without it, and that it was very successful. But I think in terms of our goals, obviously we want to have an equitable benefit to as many people as possible. And I found your data interesting, that the 100 businesses in the first 2 blocks and only 4 within the barriers. Actually, I thought it was about 6, so I didn't count right. But a lot of cost has gone into that. And, all I could think of when I realized how few of the 30 applicants and how few of the 100 businesses were using it is that for $500,000 or whatever we're close to on both revenue loss and expenses, we could have given every business in the city a stimulus check. And, I'm not suggesting that seriously, obviously, but it's a function of, trying to find something that benefits everyone, because the virus is not going away anytime soon. And I think everybody recognizes that we're well-intentioned, but we need to make adjustments. And I have some other comments about the letters and what, but I'm going to stop there for now, and I'll come back to you later.
Thank you. Commissioner Schlosser.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I appreciate all your comments and observations. Many of those were mine as well. I first want to correct, before that sensationalist comment gets misinterpreted, that this has cost the city $500,000. That's absolutely positively out of context. This whole project and putting the barriers up, the cost extended and expenses from the city were only in the neighborhood, and I'm not saying it's an expense, and Sharon can correct me, in the 30K range. So I don't want that quoted out of context. We would never have spent $500,000
of revenue. I was talking about loss of revenue.
I know. I just don't want it to be misinterpreted, Susan. I know you said that. I just don't want it to be misinterpreted.
Just an example of the overall cost.
Sure, there was lost revenue too. Absolutely. I just, again, don't want it to be misinterpreted that we spent $500,000 on these barriers, because that's not what we did. The other thing, a couple comments that I had is, I know there's been some observations that only a few of the restaurants took advantage of this, but I will say, and I walked around all weekend as well. Well, actually, since the outdoor seating was put in place, and all during the day, and based on the almost 40 emails we got, people were using that outdoor space. I know some folks might not be comfortable yet, but those tables were filled in those restaurants. And talking to the restaurant owners, they had bookings, they were filled up. So this is being used, and there's a lot of positive comments that we received. It's in the public record that we should keep this outdoor seating, no matter what else we do with the barriers, that folks really like the outdoor seating and want to keep it. If we think about why we did this, it was, again, as folks have mentioned, it was, for social distancing, allowing pedestrians to have a wider walkway, number one, and number two, to allow the restaurants to have outdoor seating and the retailers to have an extended rack space area. A couple of the critical success factors were that one would have really good communications and consistent communications about why we were doing this, what the pedestrian walkways were meant for, and where there was ample parking in town outside of Rehoboth Avenue. Not sure we really hit the mark on that one. Ditto the signage, like I think Susan said, or Edward, when you talk to people, they didn't understand exactly why, what those blocked off areas were supposed to use for. So I was disappointed we didn't get signage up. So I understand human behavior, but it does seem to me that if there were signage, if there was, more communication, that maybe the social distancing goal would have been met, better. I don't know. I mean, maybe not. I just wanted to make that observation. Whenever you guys do a project like this in the future, you got to have that communication and signage, or it's just going to go like this. People won't know what to do and take advantage. So whatever we do, whether we take down the barriers or not, bottom line is I think we have to keep the outdoor seating for the restaurants and allow for the extended rack space, whatever we end up doing to help the businesses, and then to communicate what we're doing and how we're doing it and put the right signage up. So that's my comments on it. And I also want to commend Commissioner Shanowski. From the beginning, he said that we need to assess this every couple weeks. And Mayor, I'm glad you started off by saying we are assessing it today, and we should continue to do that with anything we do. I think it's the right idea, and we're hearing a lot of good feedback. So thank you.
Commissioner Byrne.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I want to echo the mayor's comments. His observations and mine are identical. I spent a lot of time, particularly over Friday, Saturday, Sunday, wandering around our downtown streets, talking to retailers, talking to the restaurant people. It was wonderful to see how busy the restaurants, particularly the outdoor areas, have been. Even yesterday, Monday afternoon, many of them were quite busy on a Monday afternoon in June. I think we've done the right thing in providing this opportunity for the restaurants to move outside. It's kind of unfortunate that and while I appreciate the many letters that we've received, I think there was a sense from some people that we may want to take the barriers away from the restaurants and do in the outdoor dining opportunity. And I've not heard anyone speak to that. So I'm very supportive of the outdoor dining opportunity. I would like to ask Sharon, are there any more restaurant applications in the works? Do we expect any additional restaurants to provide outside dining that are not currently?
We have them trickle in, and we try to report and give you an up-to-date report. There's one that is pending right now, but this is the bulk of it. I think what we'll see as time goes on is, perhaps just one or two at a time.
Okay, good, thank you. Well, there's a lot of barriers on the 2 blocks or the 4 blocks, the 4 sides of Rehoboth Avenue where there are not restaurants operating. And I'm all in favor of making adjustments there. We went into this to try something new. There's no blueprint for what we're doing. There's no experience in what we're doing. It's an unprecedented situation with the pandemic. And we've said all along that we will monitor this. We will evaluate this situation going toward the middle of June, going toward phase 2, as the governor is calling it. And I would be very, very pleased in removing many of the barriers and creating a very wide half moon of barriers around the restaurants that are participating in outdoor dining, and thereby creating very safe space for pedestrians, more private space for diners, plenty of room for the restaurant to serve food safely. And I think that's something that we need to take a very serious look at. The way it looks on Wilmington around the several restaurants with the barriers, it seems more clear there what the intention is and where the pedestrians are to walk. I watched in front of Mariachi, it was Friday evening, and people definitely were angling out around the diners, and that seemed to be working well. So, there is some lost revenue from parking, sure, but we had to try something, and we have, and I don't feel that I need to apologize to anyone. Could we have had better data, more conclusive information several weeks ago? Well, possibly, but we've tried something, and I think now we go forward with what we've observed, what we've heard, what we've learned, and make appropriate adjustments.
Thank you, Commissioner Byrne. Commissioner Cluzzi.
Yes, I'd like to echo really Commissioner Byrne. You've said it all pretty much. And I have to say, it's so great to hear that everybody spent a lot of time outdoors on the avenue talking to all the businesses and the restaurants. I know I did as well. And I think that that's important, that I hope that all of these businesses and restaurants recognize that we are, as Commissioner Byrne said, we're trying something. We were doing what we could to help all the businesses and to also be very mindful of the social distancing and the things that we needed to do to protect our visitors and our residents. The health and safety was primary in this whole idea. I do agree that we could remove some of these barriers and have them based on what we've seen and heard and what we've tried. Some of them could probably go away and keep the barriers around the restaurants who are using for outdoor dining. That's been wonderful. It's really felt quite vibrant around those areas, and I just love seeing it. But signage would be nice. It's true. My observations on Wilmington in particular were that people were using those areas where we put the barriers out for them to walk around. But we need to make sure that either signage or roping off the restaurant so people are not walking through the middle of the tables. We'll need to do that, because moving forward, I think that this is something that we should keep through the season, probably, because it's important that people feel safe. I mean, I know that I'm not going to be going inside a restaurant, me personally. I will probably only eat outside. And so I think it's going to be important, even if we go to above 60%. There are still people who are going to feel the need to be outside. So those are my comments. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it.
Okay, since I don't have anybody's hand up, what I'd like to do is go to the public, and then we'll come back to the commissioners, for thoughts. Why don't we go right to Tom Evans, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Yesterday I failed to get in, and that was all on me. I was doing it from my smartphone in my car, and apparently I'm not that good. So I'll save those comments for a different day. But just to update things that have been said from me previously and comments made today, on the beach over the weekend, a good and a bad. And I don't think I necessarily had anything to do with it, but lifeguards are wearing masks now, at least the ones I saw, not just hanging them. So they're going to have very, very funny tans at the end of the summer, but that's okay. And I would say that the actual people on the beach walking, particularly because I didn't check everybody's sitting. No one sitting is probably wearing a mask, not even me. But walkers, less than 1%, maybe 2 or 3%. That's at beach 1, 2, 3, and 4. I assume it's maybe the same the rest of the beach. So they're definitely in holiday mode and don't think they need masks on the beach, but we're barely, I don't know what our word we're using now is, recommending, encouraging. It changes depending on which sign you see. But it's good that the lifeguards have them on because that shows we do encourage them to wear masks when they can't social distance, which they can't do when they're walking because they run into people all the time. The other two things, the only comment I'd make is, and I'm sure Chief Banks might weigh in again, but early on when we were doing you were doing the barricades talk, it went back and forth. And I know that Chief Banks was opposed to having them zigzag from the sidewalk into the street and back on. I'm guessing primarily because of tripping hazard, which was his major comment back then. But I also think it's kind of a waste of resources to rent things that nobody really needs. And maybe we just need to figure out a way to do that little arcing thing that Commissioner Byrne suggested, where we have businesses, particularly restaurants, that are actually making use of that space on the boardwalks. The other issue that has come up, and I haven't been there this week, but Turtle Bridge, the sign is greatly welcome that says masks on the bridge. But we gave up mask shaming people the first time I saw kids and parents feeding ducks without masks. And it's only going to get worse. And I don't know where this is going to go through phase 2 and phase 3 as we have more and more tourists. But loitering on the bridge with no mask, no one is social distancing. We just turn our faces and walk as fast as we can. Runners and bicyclists don't think they need a mask. So any of them that go across do not wear a mask. I almost think, and I'm not going to get any support for this whatsoever, it should say no loitering on the bridge at this point, if we're really trying to keep people wearing masks and not social distancing or some combination of that, because you can't tell parents with little kids that they got to put their masks on while their kids are feeding ducks. I'm not doing that. And they don't obey as Commissioner Gay said, they don't obey the don't feed the ducks signs anyway. And we stopped shaming them for that about 3 weeks after the sign went up. I think I have one more thing. The only other, and it's just we don't allow skateboards skating on our sidewalks. You know where they're skating now? In the space between the curb and the barriers. That's in the morning before there are people there. But they're skating like mad. There's actually more skateboarders than I've ever seen. But it should be technically illegal, but hey, no one's going to enforce that either. I think that's my whole lineup. Yep, that's everything I've got for the day, unless you come back to something else more interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Before we go to the next member of the public, Commissioner Sheffer, I saw your hand up, please.
Sorry about the delay. I just want to say that, Mayor, thank you for sharing your observations. They match what I've seen myself. And I agree with Commissioner Caluzzi that I couldn't say what I wanted to say any better than Commissioner Byrne did. But I would like to do two things. One is commend the city manager, Chief Banks, and others supporting them and how well they managed the requests on Wilmington and Baltimore Avenues. And it looks like we're moving towards a consensus on doing something similar on the two north blocks from the beach to 2nd Street and on the south side of Rehoboth Avenue between the boardwalk and 2nd Street to kind of meet the intention that we all had, was to provide people an opportunity to maintain safe distancing, but also support all the businesses who had a desire to expand their footprint to increase revenue, or at least stem the flow of the lost revenue. And I think that we are working towards doing that. I kind of view it all as a positive thing. I often see Tom Evans and his wife on the beach, and it's nice to see them. My experience in walking on the beach was slightly different than what he communicated. I did observe the lifeguards wearing face masks. I thought that a lot of the families that were close to where my beach chairs were very aware of their surroundings and trying to maintain safe distancing. And maybe it was because it was low tide, but I found it not too difficult to change my path in walking on the beach to maintain safe distancing. So hopefully people will continue to get it and behave appropriately and respecting each other. But I just kind of view all of this as a positive thing. I think we're all trying to do the best we can, and I applaud everybody who is respecting Rehoboth, as we all like that mantra or the motto. I think we're all doing, for the most part, respecting Rehoboth.
Thank you, Commissioner Sheffer. I don't see any other commissioners with their hand up at the moment. I'm going to go right to Rick Perry.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the opportunity to comment once again. One thing that I have noticed, and I took a drive around town this morning for a particular reason, because I wanted to see what kind of directional information signs the city had provided to people, because I've heard various comments from a number of sources about the lack of use of the areas where the barriers were placed. And there, at 9:30 this morning, there weren't a lot of people out on Rehoboth Avenue, but there were some. But most people were on the sidewalk, and quite frankly, in the entire area of the first 2 blocks of Rehoboth Avenue, I saw one woman walking in the area where the barriers have been erected. And I was sort of taken aback by the lack of signage. And I seem to recall that at one or at least 2, perhaps, meetings that you've had, there's been discussion about the city providing the appropriate signage so that people knew what to do, where they should walk, and that space was being provided for to enhance social distancing for them. And I think, to the extent that people are having issues with what you have done, and doing something, in my view, is better than doing nothing, and I applaud you for taking the action you did. There was an element that was necessary to achieve the goals and objectives that was left undone. And I think that has hampered the effectiveness of what you sought to do. The other thing, I just want to echo something that Commissioner Chernowski said. I've also been talking with people, and I talked with a restaurant owner, for example, yesterday, who also said to me, it's fine if the governor goes to 60%. But again, if the social distancing is going to remain the same, I don't get one more table than what I have right now. And so you can say 60% and people can think that we're doing, going to be able to do better and we're going to have more patrons. It's not going to happen. And so, from my standpoint, I think it's essential that the Board of Commissioners find a way to retain the sidewalk dining for these restaurants. If the retailers don't want to utilize the space, and you have to make adjustments to the barriers and not pay for those that aren't being properly used, then so be it. But as many of you have said, you're dealing with an unprecedented situation, and it's a new experience for everybody. But the only thing I can say is that we all learn from experience. And so making the adjustments that need to be made is the appropriate thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to Commissioner Gay, the city manager would like to say something, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. Just as a point of reference today, there were approximately 20 signs erected at the barricades at varying locations on Rehoboth Avenue. The signage was made up by the city sign department, who obviously have been working to get the summer kicked off and ready for the season. So they fit this in the past week or so, and the signage was erected today. No great place to put the signs on the barriers because the city doesn't own the barriers. So they're placed on a cone throughout the city, or throughout Rehoboth Avenue. And I don't know if you can see this. I'll hold it up.
That's good. Yeah, that's good.
Kind of like what we have here. So these signs are in varying locations. Hopefully that will help. It does say pedestrian walkway. There wasn't a lot of room to indicate that it's still permissible to walk on the sidewalk. Still, obviously, mandated for social distancing, but hopefully people will get that, and this will make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gay.
Yeah, I actually want to, first of all, sort of go back to something Commissioner Burns said, which is that there was this, fake news out there that we were going to be doing away with the outdoor dining, and that's what many of the letter writers were writing in and encouraging us not to do. And this is something I checked into this morning. There is, that's a false rumor. There is no petition out there to take away outdoor dining. I don't really know how that stuff gets started. I will say that when I read a number of the letters and noticed that about half of them had exactly the same wording, I became aware that this was a campaign, because I guess they thought that we were really serious about taking away the outdoor dining. And, I appreciate each and every communication, especially when they're thanking us for doing something. It's always nice to be appreciated. These are tough jobs and tough times. But I have to say, I've been deeply concerned by the divisiveness that's come about as a result of that. Some of the letters we got actually said, they referred to a handful of disgruntled business owners and squeaky wheels. And that's just not true. There was a petition that wanted us to consider alternatives, which is what we're doing today. And I hope we come out of this with a solution. But that was a lot. On that survey, it was probably 40 or more. And on the survey that Main Street did, 56% wanted them, which means 44% didn't. So if you combine the 44% and the 95%, you probably get more that don't, that have issues with the barricades. So I go back and just to clarify what I said before with my little joke about the stimulus, I'm talking about the amount of money at stake, which I don't have a problem with. I want to help. I think this is a great opportunity. I said at the beginning of this whole discussion, weeks ago, that one of my favorite quotes about using a crisis as an opportunity to think about things in a different way than you thought of them before. It's not the dollars. It's how it's allocated. We want everyone to benefit to the maximum that they can. We can't just benefit a few, because without the businesses, and that's all of them, all types of businesses, there's twice as many or more retailers than there are, restaurants. We need all the businesses to succeed, or we won't have the visitors who love coming here and eating out. And I want the eating out to continue not only this season, but beyond. And that's for a different day, but that's my long-term goal. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Schlosser.
Yes, thanks, Mayor, and appreciated everybody's comments, especially Rick's and Tom's. Gives you a lot of food for thought to hear from the public as well. I just have one point. I honestly don't know. I'm not ready to go one way or another on removing more of these barriers. I think back to the very first meeting when we talked about the barriers, and and I said, I made the comment, the good of the many outweigh the good of the few. And what I meant by that is we have a big obligation to public health and safety. And, I think it seems that if we take down, all the barriers except for, the bump out for the restaurants, as we've been discussing, then we're kind of putting aside that goal of expanding the opportunity for people walk, to expand the opportunity for more social distancing, particularly on our narrow sidewalks. So, I think it's a given. We have to keep the bump outs for the restaurants if we want them to survive. But I would encourage us to think about that broader goal of the public health and safety as why we did the barriers in the consideration. It sounds like there's a lot of support for taking these barriers down and opening up the parking spaces, but I'd really like to think about that. I did not see, Mayor, a lot of social distancing, even with there wasn't the amount of people you'd normally see even in a June downtown this weekend. So what's going to happen when it does bump up, when the hotels are full, when people really are starting to rent? Is there going to be any room on our sidewalks for social distancing? I just ask everybody to really think about that. And are we putting that goal aside if we take those? I don't know the answer, and I'm not opining one way or another. I'm just saying we have to think about, the impact on social distancing and public health and safety if we decide today that some of those barriers need to be removed. Just wanted to point that out again. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Szymanowski.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I echo what Commissioner Schlosser is saying with public health and safety. It's something that I'm concerned about, that I think we haven't seen the crowds yet. Again, but if maybe it's not our responsibility to think about that. I don't know the answer. But it was busy enough on the beach at the end of Rehoboth Avenue this past weekend that if there's another 190 or 70 some cars parked on Rehoboth Avenue going to the beach, that scares me a little bit. And Commissioner Gay has mentioned before, maybe we should only have 30% of the parking lot over at Deauville Beach. Well, for the end of Rehoboth Avenue at the beach there, the parking lot is Rehoboth Avenue and the parking there. So I think that was another prong of the intent on how this was going to be helpful overall for health and safety. Now, I'm not advocating that we shouldn't take them away. I just want us to be mindful of that. So if we are going to move forward, which it kind of sounds like most of us are willing to make some adjustments here, I think we need to hear from the chief and Kevin on logistically how we do that, because before we couldn't have these zigzag carve outs, bump outs just for the restaurants. So if our intent is to allow the restaurants to continue to do this and allow the retailers a few feet of space as well, how do we take these away and still accomplish that? And I think we need the guidance from Chief and Kevin to start working through the logistics with us on that, because I don't think any of us know the answer.
So if I might just make a recommendation, because we thought about the possibility of you proceeding this way as far as the barriers and creating more parking. If you allow us to come up with a plan within the next couple of days and distribute it to you, I think instead of going back and forth with our recommendations, if you put that plan to paper and you have a chance to look at that, maybe that would be a little clearer for you. The chief has said in the past numerous times, and certainly he can speak to this, that his recommendation was not to have the zigzag effect because it is a clearer picture for a straight line. It's safer that way. We still have the issue of the safety concerns that run along Rehoboth Avenue. The times that I've been out watching, it's, you know, people don't get it. I hope with the signs that we have posted, maybe they'll take other action. I've heard, you know, from many people, they like to walk on the sidewalk, they like to look in the store windows. So, you know, we have to obviously come up with some kind of plan ourselves that address the fact that you want to keep the restaurants focused on outdoor dining, which certainly we can do, but continue to have some kind of barrier in place so they at least, and the folks sitting there enjoying their outdoor dining space can have some feel of safety. So that's it. I thought maybe we could take a day or two and come back to you with some kind of written documentation of a plan.
Yep, that sounds good. I'm going to step away from that and go to Commissioner Sheffer.
Yeah, I agree. I like I said earlier, I thought that what the city manager and Chief Banks and the rest of the folks involved in this did a great job of trying to accommodate the businesses who submitted requests, both restaurants and retail businesses. And I think that certainly putting the task of planning for this type of an adjustment in the hands of the professionals is absolutely the right way to go. I think that in based on some of the other comments that people made, I think that that we're trying to be still very much aware of the need to allow people the opportunity to maintain safe distancing. My understanding all along has been that the masks are primarily intended to be used in those situations where safe distancing is not able to be accomplished. And so I don't see everybody on the Rehoboth Avenue who is in close proximity to others wearing masks, but I see more and more doing that. And I think that the people like me personally, if I feel like I'm taking too much of a risk, I'll pick different times to venture out onto Rehoboth Avenue. I think others will do the same. And but I think that we're heading in a positive direction. I think that we've given the retail businesses an opportunity to be heard. It was always intended from the beginning that all businesses in the commercial area would be heard. It took us a little while to get there, but I think we've heard from most of them by now. And I think we're trying to take action that is supportive of them while still being very sensitive to the need to allow for safe distancing.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Gay?
Yeah, talking about the parking and limiting the parking and the people there, you know, one interesting thing about that, and I assume, I asked the city manager, I certainly assume at this point we can't change this, but I had actually brought up, excuse me, early on that maybe this was the wrong time to put the 12-hour meters into effect, because then, you know, you do get people that coming and walking to the beach and staying all day and more crowded in that area. Excuse me, I got to tell them. So what's done is done there. But I have heard that people that park at the median are going to the beach. So I don't guess there's anything we can do.
You okay?
Yeah, I just have I have to cough into my elbow now. I remember that.
Commissioner Schlosser?
Yeah, that just prompted me. I got some feedback from some of the establishments around the horseshoe there that, you know, regardless of what we do going forward with the barriers, that we really need to rethink the 30 minutes around the horseshoe. That, at a minimum, it needs to be an hour, to allow folks to park there, to go get their food, to get their ice cream, to get their whichever establishment they want to go to, pop in the t-shirt store. So I just bring that up as, a consideration that while we're putting together a plan that takes into account the retailer's concerns and our goals, do we modify that at least for the next week while we're discussing what the next part of the next phase of the plan is. So I just told a couple of the folks there that I'd bring that up and ask for other opinions on that issue. So I'm bringing it up, and it sounds reasonable, but in the context of all the other things, love to hear other feedback.
On that subject, just remember that up there, I think there are 6 30-minute parking spaces in front of Louis. There are 8 30-minute parking spaces in front of Grotto. And I know there's a couple 20-minute spaces for unloading. So there are a number of 30-minute spaces already within a short period or short distance from the horseshoe or within the horseshoe. I'm sure that would be part of the city manager's plan as well. With that, Commissioner Calusi.
Yes, I was just going to mention that I was hoping that it would be part of
Audio.
No sound.
No sound.
We lost you.
I don't know why.
There you go. You're back.
There you're back.
Okay, good. No, I was hoping that it would be part of the city manager's plan to also address those 30-minute meters. I think we have to kind of look back and remember when we had the parking committee make some recommendations.
Yep, out again.
You just
Pat, we don't hear you.
can't hear you.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. You're working now.
I just have to use my hands to talk. So I'm just getting back to the parking committee. They had some recommendations. I don't remember what they were for up in that area. And so if we just put it back to what it was,
Right.
that'd be the right.
Good.
I need to talk because I think I keep coming in and out, so.
Yeah, but that can be part of her plan. With that, Carol Everhart.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple comments. Basically, everything I'm hearing, received, aware of, observed, matches what the mayor began with. There is absolutely no complaint about outside dining. I want to make that very clear. I have had no complaint about that. I personally love it. And I'm not getting complaints about that in any way. We do continue to get the concerns over the barriers. That's what it's all about. There have been a couple of suggestions for you to look at as far as a plan that might work for everybody. And it's pretty basically simple. Let the businesses set up so many feet in front of their but they have to allow so many feet between the end of their business setup and the curb. So whether you decide that's 8 feet, 6 feet, whatever you decide is, it won't work for everyone because so many of 6 of the restaurants I know are set up taking up the entire sidewalk, but it would be a very small number that you'd have to make some exception for. So that's been a suggestion that's come to me, and I'm just sharing that with you. I will tell you that no complaint on the dining at all. I will tell you that everyone has really appreciated the fact the city and Main Street, you've been willing to make adjustments. You've said over and over again. You've had a listening ear this entire time. So that has been very much appreciated. And if you want more information on that suggestion, we're happy to give that to you. If you take it, fine. And if you find that isn't workable, that's fine too. I do want to touch on the horseshoe. Yes, I have received complaints on that. The 30 minute, and I think part of the issue there is if I park there, I'm really not certain. I know 30 minutes trumps everything. 30 minutes means 30 minutes, but the signage isn't always that clear for the visitor. They think if they go back and stick some quarters in there, they're good to go, and they're not. They're going to get a ticket. And the parking, we talk back and forth about this 12-hour parking. I, for one, am very glad that we're not asking them to move their cars every so many hours and on top of all this. But I will say that you may remember that even the city staff, it's very clear. People come here between 8 and 4 to go to the beach. That's when they come to go to the beach. And then it switches over and they come back in to dine. All of the outdoor dining I've seen has been very well done. Very well done. I did want to bring you up to date on the rental report. Rentals were way up. I can't give you a percentage, but I can tell you it pretty much went from 10% up to over 50% one weekend as soon as that ban got lifted. Occupancy was up close to 80%. That's hotel occupancy. Some of them went from 0 to 100% because they opened. All of that positive. The main issue went back to the barriers. And I just want to thank you personally because you have had the listening ear and you have had a willingness to, we would have never known how the outdoor dining was. Everybody liked it if you hadn't done it. So there you go.
Thank you, Carol. Commissioner Szymanski.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Carol, thank you so much for your input. So to move forward, I guess my question to the city manager and the city solicitor is, Sharon, this plan that you're going to put pen to paper over the next day or two, is that something that you're looking for us to weigh in on a week from today? Are you wanting to move quicker in making some actions? And then city solicitor, from a legal standpoint, does the city manager have, what direction do we need to give her in starting to implement some of these changes that I think we're all seemingly on board with?
Commissioner Szymanski, I'm going to answer that part of it and then give it to the city manager. My thoughts here, as we're discussing this now, are to focus on the next phase, which is phase 2. Phase 2 technically starts Monday morning, the 15th. I don't think we get anything done between now and the 15th, although the city manager may be able to put together some kind of a plan over the next day or so. And I would think if they can put together a plan over the next day or so to get it out to the commissioners for their thoughts, with the idea that maybe get through this weekend as we are now, and then hopefully implement the plan as early as starting on Monday, if that works logistically for the city manager. But I'll turn that to her.
Thank you, Mayor. I think by the end of the week, not just tomorrow, we'll have some kind of plan in place for you. It's not going to be possible just to have everyone weigh in just in 24 hours. So I initially thought maybe a couple of days, which would mean Thursday. We can fine tune it into Friday. As far as staffing concerns, it's better for staff at the end of the week who's going to have to remove these barriers to accomplish that removal towards the end of the week. So there's just not time this week to be able to do that. So if you wanted to wait until next Tuesday's meeting, and in the meantime we can send you out something and we can go back and forth, via email and hopefully come up with something for next Tuesday, and then put any action plan into place next Thursday into Friday. It is labor intensive, obviously, moving these out and placing them and removing the water from them. But we can certainly do it. But I would ask that we try best to accomplish that at the end of next week.
All right, thank you. I think my question, maybe I should have asked more directly. There's for the city solicitor, there's nothing to vote on. This is a directive that the mayor, under the executive order, and the city manager have the authority to go ahead and make these changes without coming back before us for an official vote or anything as such.
Yeah, I think that's correct. The modifications you are contemplating, you've already taken the major action and authorized the major action. Now these are modifications that you're kind of reacting to as it goes on. These meetings are great because it gives the city manager continual policy directives, but I think consistent with what's being said today, she'll be able to formulate that plan and put it into place without additional action by the commissioners.
Okay, that's just what I want to be clear about. Thank you.
Commissioner Gay.
Yeah, in talking about the sort of the potential, anyways, what I'm hearing is a concern about potentially losing the social distancing or some of the social distancing piece of this. And, if this makes people feel any better, and I know that several people have expressed a real concern about that, and it's certainly a valid point. I mean, it's a big deal. But if you look at the sort of inconsistency of the way it is now, I mean, we don't have 6 feet. I mean, we don't want to overpromise either. We don't want to talk about social distancing as the be all and end all if we aren't providing in a routine way, in a consistent way. Sorry, not routine, in a consistent way. Because when people think of social distancing, they think of 6 feet. But we've done, in some places we don't have anywhere near that. We have the ADA of 3 feet. I asked about that at the last meeting. Why are the tables out in front of the pines and why is there no barrier there? And Dennis explained that, well, there was enough room with ADA. And I have to assume the same thing is true by the pond and Gooley's, because last week we talked about there not being room there. And then 2 days later they were there. So it obviously worked. And I just don't think, and yet people don't seem uncomfortable with it, but we don't want to create an impossible goal, and a goal that the majority of our public aren't really looking at. I mean, everybody's got different viewpoints and different feelings about it, but we have to be careful how we use a term that may be impossible for us to deliver on 100%. Thank you.
Commissioner Schlosser.
Yeah, kind of what I wanted to say was somewhat related to that. I think our role in this as the Board of Commissioners is to take the recommendations from the city manager, the chief, and others, but to ultimately assess the risk and then make the decisions. And the decisions are on us as the executive board of the city to accept or not accept certain risks. And that being said, I even though legally I think the city manager might have the authority to implement changes, I actually do think it should come back to the Board of Commissioners so that we're the ones ultimately making that decision. We're not putting the chief and we're not putting the city manager in that position to have to maybe accept risks, that we're taking their recommendations and as a board making those risk-based decisions. So I would like to follow I think what I heard the city manager recommend, and that is give her some time and leeway and her team some time and leeway, and come back with the plan and have it presented to us Tuesday and then implement it afterwards. I think that's what I heard. And so it seems like that we should take that recommendation and we be the ones responsible for accepting that plan. Just my take on it.
Yes, and if you recall, all of these Tuesday meetings are voting meetings. So once the plan is put in front of us, if the city manager gives us a couple days to look at it prior to Tuesday, we can further discuss it on Tuesday and vote as early as Tuesday on the implementation.
Okay, thank you, Mayor.
I got a note that there might be a more public comment. I don't know if since we've been talking since then, if you want to go back and ask or anything.
Yeah, I will. I just wanted to make sure we got all the hands that are up.
Okay.
I'll start over again. Tom Evans.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of spots that I just wanted to take exception in a nice way to Commissioner Sheffer's comments, because he actually made my point exactly. I wasn't referring to any, I think the families on the beach or the groups who I don't know if they're related or live in the same houses are doing a nice job. They don't have masks on, but they are staying away from people. But if a person walking on the beach with a mask on has to move out of the way because others are there dominantly without masks, that makes my point exactly. The vast majority of the people walking, and this is in the light season, on the end of the beach that has the fewest people, yes, Steve, can walk around them all. But it makes my point completely is I'm in the minority wearing a mask. The majority are not wearing masks. And it's only going to get worse through the season until we do something a little bit more aggressively. I'll be fine. You'll be fine. Also like to point out those groups, because I've noticed them on our end of the beach in particular, is that there are group houses. A lot of high school, college students, mostly college students, groups of unrelated people staying in the same house. I guarantee you they don't live together anyplace else. Having a great time, not wearing masks. I doubt they're wearing masks anywhere. They're probably doing the same in town, except for not on the boardwalk, where they're doing a very good job if they go there. Ed, I thought your point was very good. And this is the part that's been pushed back and forth about parking around the bandstand. I don't know who came up with horseshoe, but I'm never going to say that word. The bandstand circle there is the problem for many people, but all of the extensive 12-hour parking is going to put force on any more 12-hour parking than we have is going to put force on the beach there. And anything you can do to make the businesses happy by having turnover and having fewer people parking and walking to the beach from the first 3 blocks would probably be a good thing to do. And if you needed some place to take those extra water barricades, put them in Deauville parking lot to cut us back to 30%, which was my first comment weeks ago about how that's going to be our next big problem for Beach 1, 2, 3, and 4, is if that parking lot runs to full capacity, there will not be social distancing on that end of the beach. I guarantee. So I think that is everything. And Ed, I thought your points were great. I think actually whatever, and I think somebody else said they wanted more like an hour. I mean, whatever keeps the businesses getting people coming to their stores and does not have people going to the beach is the right answer. I don't know what that metric is. And cutting back on barriers to those that actually need them to have outside dining, as long as the police chief is okay with having interrupted on and off of the street surface, gives you more parking that can be used for people going to retail stores and not going to the beach because you didn't give them 8 to 10 hours of parking. And that's the end of my list. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. While I'm at it, Rick Perry, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Well, just one very quick comment. Thank you, Mayor. I spent most of my career as a corporate merger and acquisition lawyer, and I learned one thing from my experiences, and that is, in negotiating a merger or an acquisition or some other corporate transaction, at the end of the day, when you finally shake hands and both sides get up from the conference room table, neither side is entirely happy. And so I just hope you all keep in mind that you're never going to satisfy everyone, but just do the best job you can.
Thank you. And Carol, anything to add before we drop off? Carol Everhart? Oh, she's still on mute. Sorry.
No, nothing to add, Paul.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. Commissioner Schlosser, your hand just went up.
Yes, Mayor, I know this was the main topic that we needed to address, is to, assess and make modifications to that big decision we made about the barriers. But I think there's a couple other things. And when you say drop off, are we still going to have a discussion about other phase 2 activities here? Or was your intent just to have talk about that one conversation? Because I have a comment on phase 2 that I'd like to bring.
Sure. Please bring it up.
Yeah, I did want to talk. I have to admit, I was a little surprised, and there's probably good reason. I don't know the reason, but there's probably good reason that all the entertainment was canceled for the rest of the year at the bandstand. But I'm hoping, I'd like to have us make sure we strongly consider not doing the same thing for the convention center. In phase 2, the convention centers can open back up. I think a maximum of 50 folks. You said, and social distance. So I just wanted to get the, city manager's thoughts on the convention center. I guess I'd like to understand the bandstand. I suspect there was really good reasoning. I just don't know what it is. But I'd also like to understand the thinking on the convention center, because that is it's not necessarily a revenue. We're not necessarily making a profit off the convention center, but it is offsetting a lot of the fixed expenses we have right now for the convention center. So anything that can do that is a good thing, I think, to invest in. So I'd like to just understand those two things about the bandstand decision, and then what the thinking is about the convention center before any decisions made.
Certainly, the bandstand decision with the bandstand director was made based on the fact that, number one, safety with large gatherings, and number two, many of the groups who perform here are from out of state and have their own issues with the coronavirus, so they weren't planning to come here anyway. And then again, the social distancing factor, when you look at any given Friday, Saturday, Sunday night in July or August, it's packed down there. There's 500-700 people or more at any time, and there was no way to social distance. So as far as the convention center, I'll say first that on Monday, June 15th, as we go into phase 2, City Hall and city buildings will be open to appointment only. So I've instructed the staff today that they can start making appointments through one person. That will be Margaret Carson. She'll be the scheduler. One person every half hour. If there's an absolute need to meet with someone in City Hall or any other city building, Margaret will make those, will schedule those meetings, one person per half hour. This is not for walk-ins. This is not for anyone to pay their water bill or to ask a question. City Hall will still be locked to anyone wanting to come in here, just passing by. But we do foresee some business that will take place during phase 2. And then we can look at the convention center, and I'll tell you, quite frankly, as with the bandstand, as Mr. Perry called individuals or groups that were focused on coming to the convention center, some of them had already canceled way back in March and April, and just following through on that somewhat recently in April, no one was interested in coming here. So, we can look at that further. We scheduled phase 2 as a time to consider opening both City Hall and the convention center, depending on the circumstances. So I think, pretty much is going to drive with the governor's decisions and how we move forward there.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. So unlike the bandstand right now, you're not intending to make a blanket statement about the convention center that it's closed, for the rest of the year. You're going to take it on kind of a case-by-case basis. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, that's great. Okay, Thank you. That was my only question about phase 2, to be honest. It seems we have everything else kind of covered, at least from what I've read.
Yes, I just looked at phase 2, what we've had in that framework, and
Yeah.
that was really the only thing that is taking place is City Hall by appointment. But restaurants, the governor's protocol is what we're really focusing on. The 60% for restaurants, retail, bars can be open with reduced standing room occupancy, so on and so forth. But that's a lot of the things that the governor's got in place for phase 2, you can get on the governor's website, and that's out to businesses as well. And they provide a lot of signage, certain things that you can use in your business plan as you move from 30 to 60%. That's on the state's website. Any other comments, questions? I'm assuming that everybody's okay with giving the city manager the approval to put together a plan over the next couple weeks, couple days, excuse me, to focus on getting something to us, hopefully over the weekend, and then we have the opportunity to discuss on Tuesday with the opportunity to vote if necessary to move forward.
Yes.
Everybody's good with that? All right. If there are no more questions or comments, I think the meeting's done. Any last takers?
Shortest one yet.